Other than that, thank you for being here for this important discussion. This month we're joined by Steve Rissing, Professor Emeritus of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology. He will be talking about the evolution of science denial in the United States, starting with evolution.
Thank you. Hillary from the library came down and reminded us that we're not supposed to wear masks, but I asked if speakers could take them off. I told her, good enough for Joe Biden. She said, yes. So I am vaccinated. I'm not an idiot. And both of my children have had COVID. One, Jonathan, a couple of weeks ago, was a breakthrough infection. So, yeah, I'm actually real cautious about it. Okay, this is a new talk, so bear with me. Especially if you need clarity on anything, please feel free to interrupt and ask questions. General questions we'll hold to the end, make sure I can get through this. Okay, I kind of guessed maybe that this crowd might join me in going, wait, the legislature wants to ban a theory. Can they do that? I mean, the Dispatch has been having some headline writing problems lately, so it isn't quite what they wrote, but you sit today, if you're paying any attention at all, and kind of wonder, where'd all this come from? And is the whole world going crazy? At least I do. And so this is from a week ago. Okay. So, you know, we're at 1,500 deaths a day. And it's not lost on me that you all invited me to speak on 9/11. And 9/11, of course, was horrific. You know, they were a different time. Rudy Giuliani sometimes said sensible things. Became America's governor or mayor. And one of the things I remember him saying was that the death toll will probably be unbearable. 2,977 people died, not counting the suicide people that took over the planes. And although it's different, right now we're losing a 9/11 amount of fellow Americans every other day. And at least that puts it to scale. And of course we all were, I was for sure, absolutely shocked at 9/11 and the toll. But where's that shock now? 3,000 people every other day. And so, and we know the unvaccinated are 11 times more likely to get COVID. So I should mention, as they're trying to move the camera around, and that I can make all of my graphics available to you if that helps or helps anybody that might look at it. Okay, this is a couple weeks ago, 100,000 hospitalizations, the vast majority of them declining to get vaccines. Okay. A physician in the emergency room says nobody brings it up, nobody expresses any remorse. It's just something that they absolutely do not believe in. Okay? This isn't a belief system. Okay? This is science. And, you know, the history of our identifying and doing something about microbial diseases is the history of science. Okay, it's where we developed all of our insights. What's going on in these people's education almost all of them are at least high school graduates. We had them in school. How do we still have people that just don't believe in the science? As a lifelong science educator, my specialty, or one of my specialties, was scientific literacy, and I shake my head. I mean, I once was teaching more introductory biology college students than any other faculty member in the state of Ohio. Okay? So we have these people, but we kind of failed them. Okay? And so, again, 2 weeks ago, this is the moment the vaccine movement has been waiting for. Okay? And people argue now that it's an issue of medical freedom. If you want to come to Ohio State University and enroll, you have to show proof of vaccination for measles and for the spinal disease.
Measles, mumps, rubella, all those?
All of those, and meningitis, because of meningitis outbreaks, okay? If you were born in the United States, as most of us were, without any question to your parents, even if you had a home birth, the child has to be presented for a blood test. Okay? When I was born, they were looking for PKU. Now most states look for 12 to 20 different inherited diseases. That's a requirement. Okay? So what are we going to take medical freedom? All right? Okay, so I was at Arizona State University. Rumors had it that the State Board of Education had just passed science standards from which they had removed the word evolution. And so I became involved in trying to fight this. Ohio State made a great offer. I came here and I learned that the state is just beginning the process of writing its first state science content standards. And so I volunteered to serve in the process and became more and more active in it. And so this gave me a ringside seat in how that policy was developed, and I'll tell you now, corrupted. Okay? And so when we got our standards, creationism was in there, evolution was tucked around, and the State Board of Education made it extremely easy to not believe in evolution. This was 22 years ago. And so for many of us who have worked on standards, this science denial is very old. Okay? And I remember writing emails, that was a new thing, emails to colleagues saying, you know, look, we got to fight for evolution. I am in the Department of Evolution. Because this is going to come elsewhere. And it has. And so we've tolerated and kind of looked the other way science denial, because evolution's always been a bit sketchy when it comes to people concerned about K through 12 education. So this is nothing new in some fields. And so I can give you, and want to try here, like I said, this is a new talk, I can give you some insight in what happened at the State Board of Education and the State Department of Education, and how a small group of highly motivated, very religious people basically hijacked the process and forced their views about creationism into the standards. Okay? It took a long time. We eventually got it out. We had to get some board members out first. Okay? But it already reveals what was going on there. I will tell you now that while we have some very conservative members on the State Board of Education, that the Department of Education is really rock solid now. I work with a number of them. To the best of my knowledge, there's no problems now. There were real big problems back in 2001 through 2004. This is Deborah Owens Fink, and she had already been trying efforts back in 2000 to introduce into the old guidance for classes. These weren't standards, but she wanted to take the existing words here and then insert using a two-model approach, specifically evolution as well as intentional design. Now, those two models we've heard historically many times. John Jones, the judge in the Dover, Pennsylvania case, referred to the two-model argument as contrived duality. The models are evolution and creationism. But back in the early 2000s, all the rage was to talk about intelligent design. It's not God. It's an intelligent designer who can violate the laws of thermodynamics, which is not a bad definition for God, okay? But I'm winking at you. Intelligent design is not creationism. And their whole argument turned on that. Judge Jones in the Dover case basically said that's wrong. It's religion. Okay, it is creationism. The other member is Michael Cochran that we'll pay some attention to. And this is Michael Cochran. These are the members of the board. Jim Craig is not pictured here, but this is Michael Cochran, Deborah Owens Fink. Jennifer Sheets is appointed by the governor. She's the president of the board. And Richard Baker, and you'll see a little bit more of Richard Baker. He's a pig farmer, but they breed pigs. I once was talking to the board or testifying to the board and said something about, students don't even have any insights on sex and sexual reproduction, just in a biological sense. And he chimed up and said, "We don't have sex on my farm." And I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." But what he was talking about is they use artificial insemination. So, okay. I don't have my preview screen, so I have to join here, join you and look at that. And so in the end, I'll show you the process used to have to write the standards. But in the end, they had a nice standard on evolution, and Michael Cochran introduced a motion to replace the wording and use this instead, evolutionary theory, and then inserted in it the parenthetic. The intent of this indicator does not mandate the teaching or testing of intelligent design. Okay? There it is. They got intelligent design in the standards. And this wording means, to them, you can teach it if you want to, and you're going to want to. Okay? And so there were headlines all over the creationist literature that Ohio had finally succeeded where no other state could. They got intelligent design into the standards. And they never bothered to say it's in a parenthetic that says it's not mandated. But that was enough. Okay, here's Michael Cochran. Unbeknownst to his fellow board members, he also is a priest, and he's the rector, or was the rector, at a breakaway Episcopal church, the Episcopal Missionary Church. They use the 1928 Book of Common Prayer And it states that the church is biblically based, with all preaching based on the biblical lessons assigned by our lectuary, that 1929 book. Okay? He is a former prosecutor. He also was the head of the Ohio Township Council. You were talking about townships
He's
before.
as maniacal about townships as he is about this.
Yes, and
I've dealt with him in the past on some.
next speaker is going next month. We'll be Bob Leonhardt to talk about this. Okay, I got to introduce Robert Latimer. He's a chemist from Hudson, Ohio. He became a member of the standards writing team, where he failed to get ID into the standards, but he tried, but he was overvoted. He and Deborah Owens Fink start the Science Education for All Ohioans. This is a project of the American Family Association. The American Family Association was declared an LGBTQ hate organization by the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2010, I believe. Okay, Latimer goes right in the process of all of this to a national conference on getting intelligent design into the public schools. And he gives a talk there, and you can buy the tapes, or you could buy the tapes of the talk for $5. So we bought it, okay? And this is Latimer to a friendly audience describing how you too can introduce creationism into your standards, okay? We only have 4 of our people on that team. However, 3 of those people are on the critical grade 10 biology subgroup, 3 out of 7, which has turned out to be enough. They've had great influence on the group. Here is the writing team, and he is talking about okay, these people are all excellent people. One is a university professor, a PhD biologist, who's very influential. He's the only PhD biologist in the group. This is Dan Ely at the University of Akron. He is going to write the creationism, he's going to ghostwrite the creationism lecture that the board eventually accepts. A point about Dan Ely. I should plug Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. A couple colleagues of mine and I were submitting Freedom of Information Act requests to the board, and they ignored them all. And so we recruited Americans United. They put their weight on it and got all of the records associated with this particular standard and the development of the lesson that was sanctioned by the board to teach it. Okay? This is Ely's application to be on the working group. Okay? This is standard operating procedure for the Department of Education. And I've been involved in this process. I've served on several of these groups since. And the Department of Education is adamant about this. You have to follow the rules. Okay? There's the deadline for applying to be on this group. There's the trace for when he faxed in. Remember faxes? He faxed in his application. It's 2 weeks after the deadline. He wasn't a valid member of the group because they would refuse everyone like this. This is again Latimer talking to the National Conference of Intelligent Design People. The second is a high school science teacher. This is Brian Leonard. Brian Leonard co-wrote the lesson. It's his doctoral dissertation. And there's a whole sub-theme here. But in his doctoral dissertation, Latimer asked the question, would students prefer to just learn about evolution, or would you like to learn about evolution and the alternative ideas? Okay. Now, of course, there's the rub, because there's no data to support the alternative ideas. Now, in presenting, you can actually, I've been through human subjects to do research too. You can do human subject research, and you can get permission to lie to people and to say there's data that support this. But you have to go through all sorts of hoops. And how you're going to protect the people you're lying to, how you'll correct for that, and you're never permitted to lie to people under 18. Okay? So he violated human subjects, a point that we finally figured out and called the attention of the graduate school to. And that was a whole separate blow up about evil profs hurting this poor grad student. Okay, the third is a junior college biology teacher. I don't have a lot on her. She's part-time, was at the time a part-time anatomy instructor at Columbus State. And she put on her application that I'm going to start graduate courses at Cedarville. And if you know Cedarville, it's basically a very conservative biblical taking it literally. So that's the group. And then he went on, and I found this very upsetting. There's one very obvious plant in the committee from the other side. He has turned out to be a disaster for them. Fortunately, he has not had much influence, giggle again, on the group. Remember, we got a tape of this. And he's referring to John Neff. Now, we got everybody's application, and I know John quite well. So here's his application. For 32 years, I've had one goal, and that is to assist the teaching and helping of others. Due to having a deaf daughter, I am very sensitive to how people learn, especially people with handicaps, the word he used. I am much more aware of individual differences that many individuals have, okay? So this is a salt of the earth kind of a guy. He had a great tradition. Every year, the star student in his biology class got to take the snapping turtle home and take care of the snapping turtle during the summer. If anybody knows snapping turtles, well, that's a thrilling thing for a high school student to be able to do and scare everybody with it, if you know how to pick them up. Okay, here's John. He retired. He's in Tennessee now. But he was the obvious plant from the other side. Okay, here's the lesson that eventually was approved by the State Board of Education and was in our schools for use for 1 year, until I took slides like these, and several of us went around to the editorial boards of all sorts of papers in Ohio, and they started editorializing against it. So students will conduct a background research for one of the aspects of evolution in preparation for a critical analysis. Okay, there it is. Now they're getting the Trojan horse into public education. This is going to be a critical analysis, early drafts. It was a debate. And we'll script what they're going to say, pro and con. And we will have the, I forget if it was the pro side or the con side, we'll have students read all the arguments in favor of creationism and basically lie. And I'll show you some of those lies. So, what are the aspects of evolution? They're in the lesson, they're right here. Okay? You can pick from these, and we'll get pro and con statements for each one of these. Note that one of them is antibiotic resistance. Okay, well, Here comes the vaccines again. Where'd these come from? Okay. Most of them came from right here. This is a book by Jonathan Wells. It's an intelligent design screed. He's a strong proponent of intelligent design. So this is his book. Okay, homology in vertebrates is right there. Okay, Archaeopteryx is subsumed into the fossil record, as is fossil horses and directed evolution. All that sunk into there. Peppered moths are peppered moths. And the one that didn't come out of that book came out of another intelligent design proponent's book, and that's the argument about endosymbiosis. Okay? Now, the thing to realize here, okay, I'm an academic, I can be objective. These two books are not peer-reviewed. They have no real data. Okay? They have claims, lots of claims. Okay? They have no experimentation. And the authors are well-known creationists. This forms the basis of this lesson approved by the state board to be taught to, turns out my son, the year he took biology in high school was the year this lesson was available. Yeah.
Are each one of these authors academics, or are they?
Wells is a really interesting character. He's got a PhD from Harvard, and he was a Stephen Jay Gould student. But he also is a member of the Sun Young Moon Church, and wrote in one place that I'm going to dedicate my career to destroying evolution. Okay? And he, I think, is got a faculty position somewhere, I believe in Texas. I'm not real sure what his exact position was. He was a big name back in 2000, 2002. Okay, and I really haven't followed him that much since then. Okay, and so here's a sense of it. Okay, here's the debate, the stage debate that your students would be assigned to read out loud to the class. Okay, and so there's a brief supporting sample answer and a brief challenging answer. And then this text is where we introduce arguments that creationists want to be in the curriculum. And I can show you some of these. Oh, first, what's the history of the lesson? First, it was macroevolution on trial. Then it became the great evolution debate. And they just got smeared by outside reviewers for this, okay? One reviewer said it's resorting to the vacuous pedagogical tool of stage debate, okay? I don't have debates with my colleagues. I do an experiment, I show them the data, and they'll tell me, well, I believe it, or I don't, or you've misinterpreted it, okay? But many times we go, wow, you made a good point. I see what you're saying. You never see that in a political debate, and you never see that in a court of law. Many of the people behind this are lawyers. Okay? So it became critical analysis of evolution, because we were supposed to do critical analysis. Okay? Okay, this is how these things get made. Okay, and it's typical Department of Education hoops. I've been involved in this process a lot. They have a standards advisory committee. I was on that committee at this time. Okay, they advise and sometimes ghostwrite, as I did for evolution, the standards writing committee. Okay, that goes out for internal and external review, and there's a public comment period. That was rich at the time. Then it goes to the State Board of Education, and they approve it or send it back with modifications. It's at this step the change was made in the standards to say nothing in this standard mandates the teaching of intelligent design. Then we get another committee, the Model Curriculum Advisory Committee, the Model Curriculum Writing Committee, and their job is to write at least one lesson for every standard. I was on that this last time, most recent time. It's really hard work. That goes out for review, and then it goes to the board for approval. And they approved this particular lesson. The problems developed in this process on the Model Curriculum Writing Committee, you've already seen the bragging that we got our people on that committee and at the state board. What's the format of the lesson? This is an old version of it. So there's the debate. Here's the new version. And they've just replaced debate with activity, and we're still at sides. This is an internal reviewer from the state board or from the Department of Education. It still sounds like a debate because it is. Okay, it's important to realize that a number of people involved, including the deputy superintendent, were creationists, not always revealing that. Okay, so I think you would have to say that we have been as responsive as possibly can to legitimate kinds of concerns. And if you've got a concern that we didn't respond to, it wasn't legitimate. Okay, and here's another statement he made. The sun could not have shined on the process more. Well, they had this process somewhere where the sun just doesn't shine at all. It was a very interesting choice of words. Okay, this is him stammering around answering a question, and I put it in here just to say people on the board knew what he was doing. And it's interesting because he stammers right here and says, we tried to be responsive to those criticisms that were raised by at least the no, he's not going to say National Academy of Sciences, because they sent a 4-page letter detailing the standards, and the president of the board, Jennifer Sheets, said, I'm going to ignore this. Or the Ohio Academy of Sciences, which did put in commentary. None of it was accepted. Okay, Bowers is again talking. We've looked at these. We found that all of them are legitimate disagreements within the science community. And so he's defending it. You can go to any public library, and we had our people go to public library, use search engines. It was 2002. And found all of these with relative ease within 3 or 4 days. They were slow then, they weren't that slow, okay? That's him testifying to the state board. Board member Martha Wise, who's kind of a hero on the side of science, said, I want them. Give me this list of references. To this day, that list of references has never showed, okay? We had Freedom of Information Act requests in. There are no references, okay? And I'll show you how far that runs deep. Here's some of the things they talked about. One of the aspects of evolution was homology. Now, there's 2 pictures, or 2 moths in this picture. Okay, this is the great peppered moth story. Okay, can you see them both? Okay, this is a function of natural selection. This is the story of when the Industrial Revolution came to the countryside in Britain. We went from all light-colored to match the lichens on trees, and as the trees got covered in soot, the rare melanic form predominated. Okay, and so the early version of this, before review, said the student would read as part of the argument, the peppered moth experiment does not demonstrate that the moths evolved into different species. Okay? Two Case Western profs, both of whom were part of our group, wrote an op-ed in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. No evolutionary biologist claims that peppered moths speciated. That's not the point of this work. We went to different morphs. The internal staff reviewers said the study was not designed to look at species formation. And so they modified this statement to read, no new species emerged. They didn't change it at all. Okay. Further, same issue, an outside reviewer said this argument is a straw man. And the writing committee was going through these comments in an open meeting, public meeting, which I attended. Okay. And one of the writing team members said out loud, "What's a straw man?" Okay. The public wasn't permitted to speak. So the meeting coordinator explains what a straw man is. And the writing team member said, and this is not one of the creationist plants, but she then said, but straw man is not in here. Not knowing what a straw man means, scratch them, this reviewer's comments, from the record. So we'll ignore this. Okay, the fossil record, an early version of the creationist side said, additionally, a growing number of scientists now doubt that Archaeopteryx and other alleged transitional fossils are transitional. The internal review for Ohio Department of Education staff was, this is a lie. Okay? They modified it to read, a growing number of scientists now question that Archaeopteryx and other transitional fossils are really transitional fossils. So they took out additionally, and they took out doubt, and they put in, they took out alleged, and they put in question. And that's how they responded to this. Bob, I put this slide in for you. You said that I was following Dale and that you guys like Dale a lot. So I put this in. You're going to have copies of these slides. I'd like you to show these to Dale the next time you have him here. This is a cladogram of trilobites.
You'll have to name every one of them. Right?
You
probably can.
I'll blur them. I'm sure you're right. And at the end of this, that's the Ohio State fossil. Okay. These, the points where we get two different clades, are transitional forms. And as Dale has probably told you if he's talked to you, because of the geology of Ohio, we are fantastic for all the different eras that are represented as you drive across the state. So we've got a lot of this history. That's why we've got a trilobite as a state fossil. The teacher directions for the lesson says, tell your students that scientists question that transitional fossils are really transitional. Okay? That's a lie. That's state-sanctioned lying about science. Okay? That's science denial. There it is in 2004. And it was voted in. For homologies, remember homologies that, you know, this is, I can't remember his name, but the old one bone, two bones, lots of little bones, digits. Every vertebrate has that, right? That's a homology. So the early version said many times similar anatomical structures in different animals are built from different genes. That's not true. Okay? Internal reviews said this is inaccurate. Similar structures and closely related organisms are always controlled by the same genes. No exceptions. Okay? The edited version, many times Similar, I think this gets edited out. So the many's there, they take the many out, and they put in sometimes. It's still a lie. It's still science denial. Okay? And there's the final version. They kept it. The state board voted for it. State board knew what was going on. Okay? Here's these are some internal comments for all of them. And the internal reviewer nails them on everything. And the writing team ignores it, and the state board accepts it. That's science denial. Okay, this is Dan Ely sending in the references for the lesson, and this is what's been written by the internal reviewers. And since this was state activity, it's a state document, I can show this. This is the opinion of the internal reviewer, okay? And he's a biologist. I mean, that's official communication, right? Here's the references, okay? And these are the comments that the internal review process said about the references, okay? And the best one of all is a falsified reference. It doesn't exist. Now, it could be hard to find. It's in this journal called Nature. Okay? Here's where it came from. Okay? The only place you can find this reference is, and I didn't know this site existed. Somebody was asking me if anybody ever comes up and challenges me in class. So this is Professor Knockout Quotes. Okay? If you want to knock me out, you go and get these, right? This is the only place that's ever cited that. Okay? This was sent in by Dan Ely. He's the prof at Akron. I have to tell you, if I had a graduate student that did this in his or her dissertation, I would at least have to sit down with the rest of the advisory committee and go, whoa, where have we gone wrong? There actually are ways to cite references that you get in directly. I cover it with my students. It certainly wasn't done here. They eventually deleted the references, but the ideas all stay there. Okay, this is Deborah Owens Fink, and she's arguing. Remember, she was the biggest proponent for intelligent design. She's the child of not the child, but the political creation of David Brennan. You might remember David Brennan. He had a group called White Hat Management. It was the largest charter school chain in the state. So what Debbie was doing was really good for him because it would drive people out of public schools. He also was the president of the Board of Trustees of Ohio State for one term. Okay? There's nothing about intelligent design in this lesson. She's the one that introduced intelligent design in a proposal for the version of what we had as standards before the first official ones, unsuccessfully. Okay? This is Michael Cochran. You've never heard me argue for intelligent design. That's not true, because I don't want it in there. But I don't see it in there. He put it in there. He's the one that put the parenthetic in that said intelligent design. Okay? This is an article in the Dispatch in 2004, and the president of the board denies intelligent design is creeping into new science. She knew what was going on under the scene. She knew that the group of board members had corrupted the Department of Education writers and staff in such a way that this would happen. Okay? Latimer in 2003, the guy that went and gave the description of how to do this, said the clear intent of the State Board of Education was to allow teachers to teach intelligent design alternatives if they wanted to. This is him back at the National Conference of Creation People. The lesson contains no hint of religion or intelligent design, said Latimer. This is an article in the Plain Dealer 2 years later. So they're lying. They're denying. Yeah.
So, I can't remember who was Taft governor at that.
Taft was governor.
Does he, since this is the executive level, or are they an independent board? He has no control or say over what. I know he appoints members.
He appoints 9 of the 20 members.
But he has no
11 are
oversight
elected. He doesn't have oversight over them. They, Owens, Fink had some power over him because David Brennan, who was working with her and his wife over the span of the decade where this is all happening, contributed $250,000 to candidates, including Deborah Owens Fink, for public office. And so she could wield a fair amount of influence. Taft came out with a draft statement that was going to support only the teaching of evolution, and he was prevailed upon to not. And probably by Owens Fink. Okay? The writing team member said, I never saw intelligent design in there. Leonard says, do a word search, it won't come up. It will. Okay? It's not implied. This is from the writing committee meeting.
This is Trumpism before we knew about it.
Well, that's my point, Bob, is that if you're an evolutionary biologist, and then a lot of these people moved on, I'll show you a graph in just a second, to climate change. And so, I'm one of the charter instructors of the undergraduate introductory science course on climate change. So I've been double whammied by this evolution ever since I've been a university professor in climate change. This is old news. Okay? But now it's everywhere. And this is how I think we got there. Okay, here's the graph I said. This is from the National Center for Science Education. This is several years ago. And it visually it makes its point well. This is a measure of someone's degree of support for evolution, and do you believe in it? Okay, so out there, you believe in evolution, you accept it, you're happy with it being taught. Down here, you're not. Okay, this is support for environmental regulation, specifically climate change. So do you favor doing something about climate change? Up there, yes. Down here, no. And the circles represent people's faiths. And I looked, there's no humanist circle, okay? The size of the circle tells you how many people are there, how many people answered that, okay? And so we were going with evolution way before the hoax of climate change ever descended upon us, okay? I find that a fascinating relationship. And we can talk more about this at the end. But, we think we've won, but we really haven't won. Okay, teachers aren't teaching evolution. Okay, Judge Jones came down with the Dover decision the day before Christmas in 2004. I was presenting parts of this talk to the editorial board of a Cleveland Plain Dealer when it came out. Everybody knew the decision was going to come that week because both parties in Dover, the parents and the schools, said, Judge Jones, we teach evolution on Wednesday of the first week of school when we come back from the break. It'd really be helpful if you answered this question for us. One day, okay? And that's the effect of this kind of pressure on school boards. Okay? There's been a bunch of really good editorials that long before we ever worried about masks, people were pelting school boards with strong disagreements, starting with evolution. Okay, outside a school board meeting, people are protesting. A bunch of health professionals had come and said, it's a good idea to wear masks. And as they left, people were shouting, "You'll never be allowed in public again. We know who you are. You can leave freely, but we will find you." Okay, that's for public health officials and physicians going and talking to a school board. One anti-mask speaker linked the board's support of a mandate with support for child sex trafficking. Don't ask.
What is this obsession, maybe you don't know this, with conservatives and sex trafficking? Is it just a switch that they know will flip people's switch? Because there's absolutely zero evidence out there.
I don't know. You've got to ask them.
Yeah.
Okay. And, a guy wearing a T-shirt that said "not vaccinated" has a tray of masks, and he puts lighter fluid on it and torches it and says it's time to pass off this symbol of tyranny. Okay? Don't do that in the library. After a school board meeting outside of Pittsburgh, a person stood up, gave the Nazi salute, and said, "You made Dr. Mengele proud," to somebody speaking in support of masks. Somebody else elsewhere in Pennsylvania told the board, "You're doing what Hitler wanted." Okay? Why the right loves culture wars that are basically saying the same thing, that we're now doing campaigns against gay people and sex education and evolution. It all started there. This is an article from about 10 days ago, hostility at school board meeting, and somebody stands up and yells to the board, "It is my constitutional right to be as mean as I want to be to you." I read the Constitution. You can do a word search. The word mean does not show up in the Constitution. And then your question. Paul Krugman asked earlier this summer, what's up with this? Okay, and he addresses it well. A couple things we learned. One was you'll get local press if you give them a photo op. Okay, so I had discovered on that new thing, the internet, that you can mail rent full-size animal outfits. And the panda had become the symbol of the Dover case because a lot of what happened in Dover was around some donation of this creationist textbook called Of Pandas and People. And so we were accusing the Ohio board of selling out to pandas. So we ordered a panda outfit. I got a friend to wear it. And they wouldn't let him into the meeting, but he could stand outside. He and I both discovered something. People, especially women, love to hug pandas.
So would this create any kind of pandemonium?
I didn't even.
I say it before you would.
I know Tom Foley also.
Yeah, he's a good friend. Part of the time that was his son in the outfit. It was really hot. Okay, and so one of the other things we learned was, so there I'm at the meeting, they sent the photographer, he took the panda pictures, he's sitting in the meeting, and I lean over to him and said, "Take a picture of Dick Baker over there." Okay, that panda picture was on page 3 of the Dispatch. This was the front page. Okay, so this is Martha Wise, the strongest proponent for science on the board, a Republican from, I forget where, she's up north, okay? This is Dick Baker, and he's reading the newspaper, okay? And I don't remember now, but this is one of the stock fraudsters, and that story was about 4 weeks earlier than when this was taken. He found an old newspaper to use as a prop. so he could conspicuously read the newspaper, ignoring Martha. This hit the paper and caused a great sensation. The Dispatch pointed out he gets paid $32 an hour to attend meetings. He resigned from the board about 3 or 4 weeks later. And so get him props. You got to get him props. And that's it. Thank you. I hope I didn't run too far over. Questions? You've been taking notes. If those are puns, we'll talk later.
All serious. I only verbalize my plans.
All right, so we got one from Noah. I think the comedy is uncalled for during this pandemic. So on that,
Okay, that one was a stretch.
open it up for questions. Folks that are on Zoom, type them in and I'll read them out. Lindsay says, very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, good, Scott.
I have kind of a comment, if you could comment on the comment. Since you kind of showed me a little bit more about how the sausage is made, you know, that we don't really want to know all those details, it seems that when you talked about a minority of very highly motivated, passionate people that will just fight and fight and fight, I could see where rational folks that have day jobs say, you know, it's not a big deal, or, you know, where you're just so tired of it, you say, fine. And then, you know, as time goes on, obviously, you can see where maybe there was some legalese. The person on the board is not a lawyer. They don't understand that this verbiage allows something to creep in. And I was just wondering about, has that sense of perhaps apathy in the earlier years turned into a passion on the evolutionist side, where there is just as much fervor to not let things happen?
That's a good question. Did that pick up the sound?
I'm sure.
Are we just as bad? It's interesting because
Well, I mean, fervor in a good way. In other words, you're as passionate about them to make sure that they don't gain ground.
oh, I'm definitely passionate.
And has that changed over time, where people would used to go, well, you know, look, it's a couple words.
Not within the evolution community, and probably not enough in the science education community. My argument is that here in Ohio, the ones that went to college, 27% of all Ohio adults have gone to college. We had them for 4 years. Okay? What did they learn? Now, one of the takeaways of this is we don't have them that much anymore. Many students, probably a majority, now pass out of their college distributional requirements in science by getting an A or a B on their biology class in high school. And high schools are extremely compromised. One angry parent expressing their constitutional right to be mean to a board, to a teacher, but boy, if you really want to go for the jugular, go to the principal. Okay? And principals will resist at all costs any conflict with anybody. So you don't like something, complain to the principal. Okay? And it will get toned down. And that's what's happened. The new National Center for Science Education survey from 2018 is that what we teach students is just a skeleton of evolution. I write a monthly column on biology. It used to be Biology and Society for the Dispatch. And 6 months ago, I wrote a column that said, evolution and natural selection tells us that more variants are coming. Be prepared. We got Delta. Delta's bad enough. Keep an eye on Mu. That's one of the new ones. And so, yeah, some of us are, but we've been there for a long time. And you get to that God question, and a lot of people go, geez, you don't know. Maybe we shouldn't teach it that much in high school. Okay? What you're left with is a curriculum that's mainly memorization. And the inability to think through, hey, wait a second, that person could be lying to me. Okay? You had a question.
Thanks. I think I'll pass for now. Mine's a little off topic. But
I want to piggyback on this question then. What can we, as individuals and as Humanist Community Central Health Group, how can we engage in this battle in a constructive way? Because we're going to be not listened to right off the bat because they're going to say, you heathen atheists, and that we get that thrown in our face. But what can we do to engage and support science literacy?
First and foremost, pay attention to who's running for board of education in your community or at the state level.
And I never have. I'm guilty of that because it's kind of like, what? Like, it's kind of like judges. You don't know anything about a judge unless you end up in court for some reason.
Yeah, then you never know what you might know about them.
Yeah.
They do have information in the voters pamphlet. About 8 years ago, a woman named Sarah Fowler ran for, I think, what actually was Owens Fink's seat. And her bio was very interesting. She was the product of homeschooling. She's homeschooling her own children. She's a member of some Assembly of God small church. She consistently opposed, she ran unopposed, and on the board, she consistently opposed anything that wasn't biblical. She resigned from the board. She's now in the Ohio House of Representatives. Okay. I have surveyed candidates for the state and local boards, and to be perfectly honest with you, it sticks right out. Okay. Especially sometimes in their statements that, I dedicate my life to observing God's word or something. And that's signal to their voters to vote for them. The other thing, if you got children or grandchildren and a teacher's good, tell the principal. Okay, you'll shock them that they get a compliment. Okay, and do what I'm sure this group already does. Stay on top of these things.
I had a history professor, Paul Bowers at OSU. He's since died. He was a wonderful teacher, taught revolutionary American history. He said he had that same conversation with the school principal, one of the Westerville principals, about the way history was being taught. He went to him and said, "What you're teaching is this is crap." And because he first saw some of the stuff his son was bringing home, and he goes, "No, I'm not putting up with that."
My last year at OSU, some father of a student I had a year previously wrote the provost office and said that I was obviously thwarting the meaning or the role of teaching biology in my general bio course because I required students to subscribe to the New York Times. And we know that's not objective, he wrote. And that all I ever talked about was climate change. And, goes from the provost's office to the dean, to the chair of the department, to me. Respond. And so, I wrote back and said, I invite the father, I'll open up my class file on Carmen, if you know OSU. His daughter's already got the access. I had a syllabus, and I stuck to it plus or minus 30 minutes all the way through the semester. I covered all of the topics. Yes, I did have something called biology in the news. And yes, in the last 5 years, that's often been climate change. But that's my point. I want my students to know what's current. OSU used to have a program called the New York Times Readership Program. If you lived in the dorms, you got a free hard copy of the Times every day. They had support for instructors to use the Times. They quietly did away with that program about 5 years ago.
I like to read Paul Krugman for a variety of reasons, but now they're going to require a subscription to the Times to read his column, which I'm not happy about.
Well, I'll give you my password. Other questions? Yeah.
I'd like to hear your opinion about this. I wonder sometimes if a lot of the hostility towards science in our culture derives from the American emphasis on individualism and the concept that we emphasize the value of the individual or the collective group, and that I as an individual does that somehow create the sense of I as an individual have the knowledge and innate wisdom to make decisions about important issues without having to get the opinion of scientists or supposed experts in fields. That somehow permeates, in a sense, our culture and how we sometimes think, people in general think about these issues.
What I've read, and I actually went through a fair number of references for this and finally decided, oh heck, I can't possibly try to explain science denial. I can show you, how it started. What I've read is yes, that the American sense of individualism is strong, but it's been somehow abused here such that anybody's decision or thought or opinion about masks is just as good as Anthony Fauci's. And of course, Fauci's been the recipient of lots of flack, not least of which from the governor of Florida. I think it plays a role, but again, I have to ask, where in the educational system did we fail to instill an appreciation of scientific objectivity? Okay, and I think I know the answer to that we so focus on the factual details about DNA and how DNA works. Nobody, I wrote it into the model curriculum, but I don't know that they're using it. Nobody ever bothers to point out that in 1903, we knew that the gene had to be in the chromosomes. That was the big discovery in that year. And there's only two things in chromosomes, proteins and nucleic acids. They'd been discovered 15 years earlier. There are 4 different types of nucleic acid, 21 different types of amino acid. And if you're going to tell me that I'm described by a bunch of little molecular subunits, that alphabet's going to be complicated. It's amino acids. And for 50 years, the entire field barked up the protein tree, when in point of fact, it was DNA. We could be where we are today 40 years ago if we had followed what we said we did with objectivity. That's powerful. And just to put the cherry on top of it all, when in the 40s people came out and said, look, we've been working with viruses and it's DNA, many people took the position, well, that's viruses. We're much more complicated than that. Okay? And so we need to teach that, such that when Fauci stands up and says experimentation has resulted in data that tells us masks work, that gets some credence in the public, and not, well, tough. I am free to, I have medical freedom. I'm free to do whatever I want to. No, you don't. You have medical freedom.
A lot of this, I know these people are individuals, but I just was reading about this trend of, if everybody remembers, the moral majority was kind of at the height of its power at that time. That power seemed to have waned. Have you seen any of that reflected in better science teaching with the rise of the nuns versus, a lot of the moral majority, I think they've all died.
No, they haven't. I believe it or not, and thank you for bearing with it, I trimmed a lot out of this talk, and one of them was the quote from Ralph Reed, who was the founder of one of those organizations.
Christian Coalition.
What?
Isn't it called the Christian Coalition?
Yeah, the Christian Coalition. And back in the 90s, he said, and I think I can get this quote pretty close, I'd rather have 1,000 school board seats than the presidency. And in the end, they got both. Okay? But he is still around. And he's now in a different organization, but pretty much singing the same song. Moral Majority, of course, Jerry Falwell Jr. kind of fell from grace. But yeah, they're still there. And they'll make their presence known in elections.
Why is it conservatives are so willing to just lie to get what they want? They're supposed to be moral, and yet they just flat.
You're taping me, so I'm going to say I don't know. I think for many of them, and I say this because I know them, some of them, God is on their side, or the good of the party is on their side. And so we can do anything we got to do. And remember, a lot of this goes back to funding. And, we're still doing climate denial because of the fossil fuel companies. And so money comes in for many of these candidates. You want to do another exercise for what you can do? It's actually quite easy to go to the Secretary of State's site and see who's funding candidates. I learned how to do it. And it really opens up your eyes for who's the powerhouse behind these. You see a whole bunch of people from small towns in Ohio and elsewhere sending in checks for $20, and then you see other professional organizations sending in checks for $5,000. Yeah.
I more of a comment, but the notion that individualism, or extreme individualism, might be a reason that leads a lot of people in this country to anti-science positions, I think is very valid. But also, I think we can't forget that the anti-vax camp includes a lot of what's called the more New Age types, who are not traditional Christians at all, but have another set of dogmas and reasons for falsely believing that vaccines don't work. And they wouldn't have the views on evolution probably, but it does seem like there are different angles that get to this anti-science.
They're on there. They are mutually supportive. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to imply that it's all just religiously motivated.
I have the right crystal. I'm going to be okay.
I will say that I think the anti-evolution stance, which is still out there, was religiously motivated or motivated by people like David Brennan, who stood to benefit greatly if he could blow up public education in the state. And we see a grown-up version or bigger version of that with Betsy DeVos.
Yeah.
And she was actually quite successful, but didn't get the job done.
What were the names of his charter schools? You said he owned a lot of charter schools there.
I don't remember the names, but it was all under White Hat management.
There were various names. I remember White Hat.
Yeah. The AFL-CIO put out a white paper on Brennan that I have somewhere buried in my files that was really quite insightful. Okay.
Just quickly, do you have any other insights through the Friends of Friends or things about issues like Amy Acton or any of the shenanigans that might have gone on within the Republican Party and why, people resign, or the fight that DeWine has or continues to have? Have you had any conversations about those sorts of things?
I haven't. Remember, I retired 3 weeks before the first COVID case appeared in North America, in what I like to refer to as an accidental stroke of brilliance. I would have spent my last semester teaching at OSU halfway through going online. I haven't, but I think what has happened, I'm going to have to say it, in the Republican Party, is that all of this reached critical mass. And so now we see the effect of permitting science denial in some areas, letting people fund science denial. The whole ExxonMobil knew about climate change but was funding efforts to deny climate change. All of this has come to a head under the banner, although he didn't cause it, it caused him, under the banner of a demagogue like Donald Trump. And now we don't know what to do with it. And
I got a couple ideas, but
yeah,
you can't.
I think the next election is going to be extremely pivotal this way. And that's a different topic.
We have a question from online. Jace asks, what are the best strategies for combating science denial?
Science education and effective science education. I was the director of the introductory biology program at OSU. I lost that position because of everything I was doing with evolution. I just moved my family across the country to do that. But they let me, basically said, I dare you to not let me teach my class the way I want to. When I was director, 95% of our credit hours were issued in courses offered by tenure faculty. And when I retired, I was the last tenured faculty member teaching any introductory biology course at OSU. Now that doesn't knock the lectures and the various adjuncts they have, but they're given the syllabus and they're given the textbook. And the strong implication is you will do anaphase, prophase, and telophase. Remember that, cell division? And they do it. And so I think there's some introspection going on nationally. I'm going to try to write a few op-eds about it. But we have to go back and look at how we teach the general public, not the professionals, the general public, you folks, how we teach you science.
Question. I come from a history background. It's been one of my frustrations for years about too many historians write for other historians.
Mm-hmm.
It's boring. It's factually correct, but it's boring and nobody reads it. So you get a person like David McCullough, who's not an academic, but a wonderful writer and a good historian, although his latest book was okay. But do we need, or maybe you could name, who are some good, I know Brian Greene writes real well about physics. I mean, Carl Sagan wrote about that years ago, but are there people doing that kind of work nowadays, and do we need more of them who can make science accessible, good science accessible and understandable?
I think there are many people, there's many good teachers, but we have a special burden in biology and a special burden in evolution, okay? It's called the Medical College Admissions Test. And I did a study on this. If you look at the textbooks required for introductory biology courses across the country for majors, which is pre-meds, and you correlate the topics and the treatment of topics, even the timing of topics, in those textbooks, it perfectly correlates one for one with the list of topics that the Medical College Admissions Board tells you in the guide for studying for the MedCat test that they're happy to sell you. What is the most important things to know to pass the MedCat? And anaphase, prophase, and telophase of cell division is in there, okay? Now, most of those books now cost well over $100. They're approaching $200. They're at least 1,500 pages thick. But the big market in college biology is the general ed courses. Okay, so all of those companies have a general ed textbook that's about a quarter the size of the majors book. But what do you do when you're sitting on all this fantastic art for a majors book, and now you got to come up with a general ed book? And I took some of the tracks from majors textbooks and then got their general ed textbook, and I could go through and blue pencil out all of the text that they deleted to shrink this down. And the illustrations from the majors text that they put into the general ed ones. And what's interesting is that the amount of MedCat terminology that's in the general ed books goes up per page, because they took all the good stuff out when they edited. They took all the good stories out and they left anaphase, prophase, and telophase. Okay? Furthermore, they used the art, the very same art, but they dumbed it down. And so in the majors book, there's something like 17 various hominoid ancestors in the diagram. By the time you get to the general education one, there's only about 6. And so they're doctoring the evidence for evolution. And so if you or your child or your grandchild take a college biology course, although it probably will be in high school, they are using as a textbook a MedCat preparation guide. It's not sold that way, but that's what determined how it went. And so nobody's asking, and maybe this is true in history too, nobody's asking, what science do you folks need to know? Okay? How many of you remember anaphase, prophase, and telophase in high school? Remember the diagrams with the little chromosomes and stuff like that? What the hell do you need to know that for? Okay, you don't. But oh man, if you could find out how they discovered that. Brilliant work. Okay? How do we know that? Now that's something you want a scientifically literate citizen to know. That you can do observations and you can draw conclusions. And that was done in 1903.
I love that Jennifer Dowden in her book that Isaacson wrote. She said that she was motivated to her career by reading The Double Helix by Jane Philosophy.
You gotta read her book. She's got a good book on CRISPR. And she deserves all the credit. So
I guess I'll ask. So I guess this is a hypothetical question because I was kind of naive about how much the intelligent design advocation was so bad faith. What is your sense of if you could teach a little bit of evolutionary theory alongside intelligent design in a good faith way, in detail, like how this one proceeds methodologically to how this one proceeds, would that be valuable?
I have a colleague who teaches a course like that, and it's very valuable there. The trick in trying to bring intelligent design in to a biology class is you can't find it. Okay? I learned a lot going through all of this. I got interviewed by a lot of reporters, and I was talking with Patricia Princehouse at Case, who was co-leader of the effort. And we both realized that reporters were lazy, and they were asking us, well, what is intelligent design? And we both decided that we were now going to answer that question by saying, ask Dick Baker. Dick Baker's the guy that was reading the newspaper. Okay, he's a proponent for intelligent design. Go ask Dick Baker what intelligent design is. He never could answer it. There is no theory of intelligent design. Okay, it says that all the complexity you see out there is because some force who's really intelligent did this. Well, you're denying your God. That's in the New Testament. You're not supposed to do that. Peter did that, right? Say it. The idea, Martha Wise on the board said, I'm a creationist. I believe there's God, and I'm sure God's somehow responsible for what we see. Charles Darwin said it. In the 7th edition of the Origin of Species Through Natural Selection, he added a phrase to the very last sentence. And it was to address this issue. And it's that famous sentence that says, there's beauty in this process where life, having been breathed once or perhaps a few times by the Creator, goes on and continues to evolve in amazing ways. That's a paraphrase. Okay? So people have done some really cool epistemology diagnosis of Darwin. And he went through a period of cognitive dissonance for about 10 or 12 years. And finally, at the end of it, and he does it in that sentence, he takes God and moves God out of the process of speciation. Okay? Darwin knew that there was an old world and that there are species there, this is the voyage of the beagle, that are like species here, but they got different. And he had God in there. And then he finally realized, wait, this makes a whole lot more sense. Let's just put God out of that whole process and let him or her sit up here. Okay? And so it's real hard to teach that, although I have taught that change in the thought of Darwin in a science class and not have some parent write the provost and say, I'm off topic.
They should just watch America Winner.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
You don't like watching Clarence Darrow?
Oh, I do.
Brian was a great man, but I get a kick out of that.
I like the opening song, which is "Give Me That Old Time Religion."
Got one from Noah. It says, a lot of solutions we need will rely on our youth. The concern I have are many parents have charter schools and homeschooling to fall back on for what they deem are emotional or cultural issues that are clearly proven by scientists or qualified researchers. How can we break through to those parents who have the ultimate say in whatever bogus and dangerous beliefs they want to pass down to their children and communities?
How do we break through to them? I think some of them you can't break through to. Okay, I get a lot of comments on my columns, and I carefully curate them into hopeless. Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate them, and I'll engage. And I can get through to some of them. I sent charts of data on climate change to people, and they've been polite and wrote back and said, well, you've given me something to think about. That's my job as a professor. My own solution to that is I write a column in the Dispatch. And I try to talk about how evolution can give us insights into things like pandemics. And Donald Trump said, no one could have imagined a virus like this coming. Oh, God. The Obama administration had a whole scenario planned on how to respond to a pandemic, and they offered to have a transitional meeting with the Trump team, and they said, no, thanks. Okay? All the epidemiologists knew we were just waiting for it. I'm worried about the next one.
Ones.
Well, sure. This is our third coronavirus epidemic or pandemic so far this century. Okay? And the biological setting that has given us those is only more intense. There's more people in the world. They're getting hungrier, and they're going into the wild and eating more wild animals. Okay? The Ebola outbreak in Liberia and Sierra Leone apparently was fueled by fruit bats. Fruit bats live in the Congo. It's 800 miles away. But there's been lots of deforestation there, and so they lost their homes. And they took to the wing. They flew west. Okay? One of them got eaten by somebody in one of those countries, and the whole thing took off. Okay? Coming out of the live markets of China and Guangdong province, they're just doing more of that. And so this process that has generated these is only becoming more intense. Right now, the rate at which mutations occur in a population is directly a function of population size. One swab from a person with COVID has over 100,000 virus particles. Think of all the virus particles in that person. Over 300 million people in the world have had COVID. Okay? Now there is a doctoral oral exam question waiting to be asked. What's the population size of coronavirus CoV-2 in the world today? It's astronomical, okay? And so the solution's real simple. We got to vaccinate the world, irregardless of nationality. I mean, the Delta variant arose in India. Right? The next one's going to arise somewhere like that too. It's not going to arise in, New York City. They're pretty well vaccinated. It doesn't matter where it arises. And so we look at the power of evolution, and we don't teach it. That's sad. The other thing I try to do is I write my column. And I pose that question: what is the size of the virus population in the whole world? Yeah.
One other question in some of the culture wars going on today, I've also noticed some critiques or attacks on science from a more identitarian sort of angle that science is tied to Western hegemony or tied to, and do you think that's another possible Trojan horse that's going to gain more steam? I know there's been traditions in Canada with the so-called other ways of knowing tied to certain indigenous traditions that, while might be interesting anthropologically, probably ought not be taught in Canadian schools on par with science. I don't know if you have that much in the States, but I was wondering, is there another, do you see this as a risk, or is it just a few crankish people kind of who might be undermining science from that side of the country?
I think it's always been a risk, and I think that we do tend to identify science with Western cultures, although a guy whose name I'm not going to remember, before 9/11, wrote a book called What Went Wrong.
Is that Bernard Lewis?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And
he just died last year.
Did he? Yeah.
Age 100.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but his argument was that the real seed of science was in the Middle East. And it was basically the world of Islam. And it was completely compatible until at some point it wasn't anymore. They had the edge. Western civilization, to the extent that it existed, was way behind them in understanding science. And so Lewis asked the question, where are there Nobel laureates? And so they lost it. The Chinese at various times have been very good. And clearly, there's a lot to be said for appreciating those other cultures. My wife worked in the school library as a volunteer at our son's grade school and checked out a book called In the Beginning And it's a very artful, full-page illustration of the creation stories of 25 different cultures and religions. It's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's a cross-cultural phenomenon that people have asked, where do we come from? We can respect that. That's a real sign that humans are different. We're thinking, okay? And I told that story slightly longer at a talk to some atheist agnostic group. And right in the middle of saying 75,000 years ago, we had ritualized funerals. So people are asking what comes later, what comes after this. So he stood up and said, we don't believe that. That's not the point, okay? And our son was about 12 years old, I think. Well, I was driving home afterwards. He said, Dad, that guy didn't get it. It's not the point. The question was getting asked. It's okay to answer natural selection, but we can respect those others without alienating them, especially now as we go and try to vaccinate the world.
And the back then, when these things were being developed, there was no petri dish. There was no way to look and discover, and now we can discover and find a better true science.
Sure.
And so that's
yeah, I have no.
And it's amazing to us.
I have no
for those
problem at all. I gave up trying to understand it a long time ago, but I find it very interesting that cross-culturally we've asked that question. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think the squirrels that raid my bird feeders ask that question.
I wasn't taught a lot of biology. I'm a business major, and in arguing with people on the internet, which we all know is a productive use of anyone's time, I had to learn a lot about evolution, and it's far more fascinating than I ever thought it was. When allopatric, peripatric, sympatric speciation, how things divide, the fact there are phases, and that horses and donkeys can breed, but then they produce sterile offspring called mules, and so there are these stages. And I was never really exposed to any of that. Or how do you get reproductive isolation within a population when they're all in the same area? It's because a bird call is slightly different than their neighbor's call, which slightly more attracts a certain, so they don't even have to have geographic isolation. I was so fascinated to read these things because I wanted to answer the creation. So now I think I know a lot more about evolution than certainly most of the business majors I've ever met. And if it was interesting to me, it could be interesting to anybody.
Oh, I think so. And a good teacher can do that. That's what John Neff did with his snapping turtle. Okay, I saw that snapping turtle, man. That was several quarts of soup size. Yeah, but when you've got a principle that says toe the line, you're going to toe the line. And that evolution is natural selection. Thank you very much. It's not. There's much more to it. In fact, the most important force of evolution today is not natural selection. Don't worry about it. It's genetic drift. Genetic drift is that weird thing that happens with very small populations, that you start losing genetic diversity in a population. Okay? So if they still have manatees at the Columbus Zoo, you do not have the entire gene pool of manatees in that population. Okay? And as we destroy habitat and all sorts of species are going way down in number, the thing you want to worry about is genetic drift. You only got 4 condors, you do not have the whole gene pool of condors. And they're probably doomed. So yeah, there's a lot more evolution we should be teaching. My favorite one is, I haven't put it in a column, but a number of people have speculated that RNA viruses, which includes coronavirus, but many others, that's actually an adaptation for more mutations. Okay, that if you're a virus mutating a lot, and they do it about 1,000 times more than DNA viruses do, that could really be good. And so if you're in 300 million people on Earth, keep trying, see what else you can come up with. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking of the people you were speaking of, came up with a term that they could couch their message into. We could too, and it wouldn't seem like we're talking about evolution by doing it, another way around and using different terminology and coming up with ways of speaking of it that don't automatically get the ire up of the other side.
Well, they did that for a long time and it didn't work. The state of Ohio back in '93 passed it wasn't standards, it was pre-standards. It was kind of a suggestion of things that you could teach. The word evolution doesn't appear there. Change through time appears there. And the problem with that is, see, this beard wasn't always white. It and I have changed through time. So has my car.
You've changed during this presentation. So.
Yeah, and so it's ill-defined, and it denies what we know.
That's Russ. He changed through time.
Yeah, and so we need to state it. And you put evolution and climate change together, and you get COVID, and you're going to get a lot more of them. And there's no way under the sun we're going to be able to plan for that. We won't know how it's going to hit us. That's what you need to teach business majors. Really. So, if you got any questions, it's rissing.2@osu.edu, or if you want to make a political statement, it's, remember, those are state property. They can, and I have had people FOIA request my emails at OSU. It's also my first and last name run together, Steve Rissing @hotmail.com. Be nice. Not everybody that sends me email there is, but I'd be happy to answer any questions and help any way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, if you have anything else, I'll let you all hang out, socialize, and how long we have room for?
3 o'clock.
All right, so the hard stop at 3, probably closer to 2:30. We gotta clean stuff up. So, thanks everyone.
I'm doing dinner tonight, so I have to leave a little bit early.
No worries.
Chicken leg quarters are on sale at Kroger.
Thanks so much for answering my first email to begin with. I
hope that was.
We were talking about getting speakers. I'm like, I know who I want to have as a speaker because I read your column every month. I'm like, there's somebody out there. There's a voice in the wilderness out there that I can identify with.
Thank you, and thank you for reading.
Dispatch, I'm worried about its existence.
I am too, and I'm worried about the science pages because it's unusual for them. What I don't understand, and I'm almost afraid to ask, is, they circulate their articles now amongst all the USA Today papers. We'll send out the columns. Let other papers run it. And I'm afraid that if I asked that, whoever would make that kind of a decision would say, what the hell are we doing with this anyway?
Well, as I said, I come more from the history, and I'll never forget this. My nephew coming home from high school talking about his history teacher, and all he was doing was these, what do you call, like, give me a date, give me the names and all this stuff, and he says, yeah, my history teacher said Hillary Clinton's the devil.
There you go.
I told my nephew, I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm saying this right in front of my older brother. I said, I want you to go to school, tell your history teacher that your uncle said he's an asshole, and that he wants to come in and debate him. He goes, oh, I can't tell him that. I'm like, you tell him that, word for word. You tell him, I said it. I'm an adult. I can stand up for myself. He goes, oh, no, he's a pretty big guy. I said, so am I. I said, right now, I'm pissed.
Write the principle.
I should
write the principle.
I never even thought of doing that. But it's like, you should not be telling kids this. You should be telling kids, teaching them how to think. I remember my I don't know if you've ever met or ever heard of Jack Balser. He was my advisor up there. Brilliant guy.